when they use suicide as the means for the character to solve their problem.
Or glamorize it.
Well, glamorize it, but, you know, they don't know how, it's like they don't know how to solve the problem, how to get the character out of the mess they're in.
Well, it's a short-term, it's a long-term solution to a short-term problem.
Yeah.
That's how they're doing it.
Permanent solution.
It's a permanent solution. There you go.
Right.
And,
Short-term problem, they're not addressing the problem, you're right.
and, you know, and that says to me, it's like, okay, you can solve your problems by just killing yourself.
Well, and it's a viable option. I mean, it is an option. And it's an option that we have to recognize is a reality that exists. And when we look at our young people and our elderly, we look at key risk factor groups, that is very much on the top of the list of their reality. And how are we addressing that and dealing with that problem?
They're not. They're covering them up.
Covering up. And I have a lot of offense. You know, Larry, you brought up the issue about Romeo and Juliet.
Yeah.
We read that in 10th grade, don't we? Romeo and Juliet.
Nice.
That is the most powerful story that needs dialogue. No dialogue is mentioned about what the risk factors are there, or the alternatives, because we know, we try to teach kids this is idealized love. This is not idealized love. This is unhealthy love.
Right.
And we're not having that dialogue, that here's some risk factors here that we can point out, reading this story, that says we've got two young people that are in trouble, to the point that they're feeling unbearable pain, that they're going to resort to this extreme. And we're telling this stuff to our kids without realizing that impact.
What they're doing is romanticizing,
Absolutely.
which is a myth. It should not be taught, especially in the 10th grade. Everybody in the 10th grade is young and they're infatuated, and first loves, and all those things that go on in the 10th grade.
Suicide, it was actually a scheme gone wrong. But there was a suicide in it. Right, but it was just a scheme to escape. And then
Right. But it's not ever presented that way. It's just talked about as the Shakespearean literature.
But to go to that extreme of self-harm is scary, isn't it?
I read there was a little article once about if they hadn't, and they end up getting married, it didn't go well in the follow-up story. You know, there were two young kids, and they got married. It didn't go well. They split up. They found other people, and they moved on with their lives. So the point was,
I would throw that out with the Disney Channel or other channels talking to our fairy tale. Cinderella, Snow White's the worst things you could be telling your kids.
Fairy tales are scary.
Pardon me?
Fairy tales are scary.
Of course they are.
But what is the message? What's the message that's being portrayed here? That
there's only one solution to your problem: is to marry the prince. And if you don't marry the prince, maybe you'd be better off dead. And to be dramatic like the TV.
It's scary.
Right, it is scary.
It is scary. And a guy who spits you out from your foot, and he spent all evening with you. Because in the original tale, this dance was 3 days in the original tale. And I read the story and I go, he never once knew her name. I don't understand that. He danced with her all night, 3 nights.
Typical man.
But you know what happened?
I'm trying to find out what your point to that.
What's your
And then use a shoe to find her. Now to me, how can that be happily ever after? It doesn't make sense in the psychology of things.
Only one woman could fit in that one shoe.
Lucky for that. How many size 8s are there?
Yeah. How many times do we have to keep looking for?
All I'm saying, he had a foot fetish. That's all I'm saying.
You know, you're blowing apart all my things as a child. You know that I.
It's important to.
Yeah, important to me. You know, you're blowing my bubble here.
But we have to say that bubble's not healthy, because Cindy can talk about women in her domestic violence shelter looking for Prince Charming and thought they had it. And it's not a reality.
And they'll be Barbie too.
And they're all Barbie.
Right.
Gabe, you wanted to make a point, I'm sorry.
Yeah, the military looked at those aspects of when we keep on preaching about suicide, even though some of it can be documentary and best options, the fact that they keep on talking about it, people don't really know how to take it off the shelf as an option. And I think that's the main reason why we're switching to more of a resiliency aspect. So to avoid that thinking trap. And so to talk about that as an option, even though, yeah, it is an option, but how do we get past these thinking traps? And I don't see any of that on TV as far as documentaries on what's resiliency and how to cope with.
I think the difficult challenge is that we're not being strong enough of making the connection between mental health and suicide. They're not separate. It's the ultimate result of untreated mental health issues. It's the ultimate result. And murder in that sense can be too. The ultimate result.
I think we have to be real careful in that we shouldn't be so absolute. I still have this issue that those topics are being talked about, maybe not enough, but the beginning of them is because, you know, J.R. Martinez, who's in All My Children, who was burnt 40% of his body from being, from a Humvee went up, and he tells a story, and in the soap opera he tells a story, and he keeps telling his story to people that are in pain, that want to die, about how to survive. And then on General Hospital, there is a Marine who talks about his post-traumatic stress and coming back and being lost, and telling a little kid how he found himself and how he wasn't going to how he was going to stay resilient, and he was talking about resilience. It's there, not enough. But the beginning is there, and it's those shows we have to look at and start to build from, give credit to, and have people start to watch and get on board. Because it is there, but it's not enough.
In regards to the elderly, I wonder what the effect was of, I don't recall what the effect was of when the show was done regarding Jack Kevorkian. When you could just feel so out of it and can't handle it any longer, you know, you're taking your own life, and what's the results from that thoughts and what has occurred?
Well, the research that's been out has basically been able to suggest, because there's a lot more research needs to be done, suggest that there is an association between reporting suicide on TV, news, and actual suicide, and raising rates of suicide. And some of the more riskier groups are the elderly, are the teens, where you see hikes after a suicide is reported. And they also said that they found that most of the impact of the suicide is during the first 10 days after the reporting. And it sort of dies off after the 10th day, around then. But that's a critical time in that week and a half after a report is done. And if the method, how much energy is spent on glamorizing the method that's there, and also how local is the death is going to impact. What are the economic issues going on, or the societal climate at that time is going to impact on the rates going up. So they're recognizing on a connection, but there's still so much more work in trying to fine-tune that.
Isn't the story of Tom Sawyer, the big thing about Tom Sawyer is that even though he was dead, he got to see his funeral and how people loved him and the impact his death made with him not being there. I think that's what we have to look at, not how it's affecting just the person, but the survivors themselves. And when people see how, I think that's the point you're making in having it more realistic, Larry, having it more realistic and how it impacts everybody, that might help to not have the raising of the, go ahead.
I think what Vanessa was just saying before about raising the rates when a program is on, and I think, Steve, you alluded to it also, that because we're talking about suicide and all of a sudden the rates go up, is that the research is yet out, because I think with schools, the schools have always held back. They were afraid to talk about suicide, even if there was a suicide in the school, because they thought by talking about it, they would put it in the minds of other young people.
Right, exactly.
We know that is a myth. We've got to destroy that myth, and if we talk about suicide, we talk about it openly, honestly, and in a healthy manner. Because otherwise we will push suicide to the back and not deal with it openly and correctly.
And the consequences that it leaves.
Right.
Yeah. Along with that, though, is because, you know, I think in the early days we always talked about not glamorizing it, but at the same time, how do you talk about it? Because, you know, if we do not talk about it in the schools, you know, for example, well, then you're ignoring the fact that this person had a life, that this person mattered, and, you know, and so it was always the problem, where's the line between indicating that this person lived